Hey everybody, this is Jeffrey Way with net.touchplus.com. Welcome back to a new screencast of the week, this time on building a simple little content slider jQuery plugin. So to give you an example of what we'll build, just something really simple. So if I refresh here, we have about a 3-second timeline before it fades into the next image. Let's wait a couple more seconds and then it fades into the next one. So let's take a look at how this is done. We're using a custom plugin we built called JW Slider. Because there are so many sliders available, sometimes it's important to preface it with maybe your initials or something like that. We call slider, and we can pass in a speed and a pause. So if we wanted to see a little bit more about how we can customize this, just so you know what you're building, let's drag this into TextMate. And let's also do something like, let's set the transition to slide instead. I'm going to save that, come back to Firefox, and now when I refresh the page, it slides instead of changes the opacity. So this is what we are going to build today. So I'm going to close this out, exit TextMate, and delete our demo. And I've created a new folder called JW Slider, and I've added 4 of these holiday themed images. So let's begin. Let's bring this into TextMate, and I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it index.html. First thing we want to do here is let's create our heading, JW Slider, demo, and then let's create our list of images. So the first one, they're stored within the IMG folder, and they're just labeled 1, JPG, 2, 3, and 4. 2, 3, 4. And just to have something to work off, let's load it in Firefox, and we now have 4 images. Okay, so I've said this many times, it's easiest for me if I go ahead and set up how I'm going to call the plugin. Let's go ahead and load jQuery. And the next one is we're going to load our actual plugin. So we're going to store this in a JS folder, and we're going to call it jwslider.js. Trying to clean up just a little bit. Okay, and now at the very bottom within script tags, we're going to call it, let's say we're going to reference the unordered list, or all of them on the page, though if we have a big project we would want to be a little more specific, and we're going to call JW Slider, like so. And it should work just like that, and then if we want we could pass in parameters. So now we're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call it JS, and a new file, and we're going to call it JW Slider. Okay, and that should be everything for our homepage for now. So let's go ahead and get beginning. If we're building a plugin, we might want to, at the very top, put some information about the plugin, who it was created by, when it was last updated. I'm not going to worry about that for now. We're going to go ahead and wrap our function within a self-invoking anonymous function. Basically, this will allow you to not worry about any clashes with the dollar symbol with other JavaScript libraries. So basically here, we're adding a function. Let me just do this from scratch. We're adding a function like so, but we have to worry about using the dollar symbol. So instead, why don't we accept the dollar symbol as a parameter and then pass it in? That way we don't have to worry. And to pass it in, we're going to wrap this like so, and we're going to pass it in. So when you wrap it, you basically say execute, and anything within the second set of parameters, the second set of parentheses will be passed in here. So dollar symbol will now be represented as jQuery. Pretty simple. So now we're going to create our new plugin. So jQuery.prototype, and we're going to call it JW Slider, which is the same name as the file name, and it's going to be equal to a function. And we want to allow the user to set some options. So we're going to add these, and let's first start with our defaults, and these will be the base default options. So we'll maybe do something like how the speed, maybe 1000, the pause between each one will be maybe 2000, and the transition type, we don't want to build something too bloated. There are some plugins available that are fantastic, but they have slide up, slide down, slide left, slide right, all of these really neat kind of effects, but it comes at a cost. They're much more intensive. They're bigger files. So we're just going to build something simple. 75% of the time, all I need is maybe a fade transition or a slide transition. So we're only going to allow 2. We'll set the default to fade. And let's set another one. And options, this is going to be jQuery.extend, and we're going to take the default options that we just created, and we are going to override whatever the user passes in, and we're going to store them in the modified options variable, like so. So next, we need to do this.each. And for each item in the wrap set, remember, when we're calling it, we could technically have 3 or multiple unordered lists that's being called, so we need to go over each set that was passed in. And the first thing that we'll do is we're going to cache this, so we'll call it jQuery or $this and make it equal to this. Next, what we want to do is we're going to take the unordered list and wrap it. So you'll see this is very common for sliders, and we're going to wrap it, and we'll call it div class equals slider wrap, something like so. Okay. The next set is we actually have to set some CSS. So you have a couple options. You could do this in a style sheet, but we want to make it as simple and easy to use as possible for the user. So I think it might actually be a good idea, which is rare actually, to put the CSS within the plugin. So this.css, we won't put anything too specific. The first thing we have to do is we want to set the width of the unordered list to something really, really wide, an arbitrarily really wide number, and that way we can float all of our images to the left and it will display horizontally. So we'll say something like width, and we'll just say something like, you'll see this all the time. And the next one we'll do is we have to set a position to relative because we are going to manipulate the left and right values. And if you would prefer, you can always take this out and put it in your own style sheet and make up your own mind. And we want to make sure the padding is set to 0 as well. Okay. The next step is we need to, dependent upon whether the user wants a fade transition or a slide transition, we're going to have to set it up slightly differently. So what we'll do here is listen for it. So we'll do if the options.transition equals slide, then we'll do something, and then we'll do something else if they choose fade. So we'll do this.children.css. And just to clarify, this.children.css is now referring to each list item. So now we're going to take these and float them to the left, right? So we'll do float left. And what we can do here, just to make sure it's working, is refresh the page. And nothing's happening just yet. And it's because we have a little bit more work to do. And also because we have the transition set to slide, why don't we change the default like so. Okay, I guess we still have a little bit more work to do. Something to make sure your plugin is working though, sometimes it's smart just to do a console log, something like that. Refresh the page, and let me view my status bar. And we do have the syntax error. If options.transition, let's see. And looking, of course, we have 4 equal signs. It should just be 1. Let's go back to Firefox, refresh the page, and we're not getting any errors. And now you can see they are displaying horizontally, and this is because we applied an enormous width to our unordered list. So let's continue. We're going to float each of these to the left, and the next one is we just want to make sure that the list style is set to none. It might already in the user style sheet, but we just want to ensure that. Okay. The next step is we want to add some styling to the slider wrap. So we'll do this, or just get it like this, slider. Like so. We're using a class, by the way, for the slider wrap is because you could be adding multiple of these wrapping elements to the page, so we should be using a class. And we're going to do .css and style that as well. And here we're going to set a specific width on this containing item, set the overflow to hidden, and that way it'll cut everything off. It's kind of a cool little trick. And we'll do the width is going to be, and the width is going to be the exact width of its contents. So the way we can find that out if we're using something like images is we can do this children width. And in this case, it'll find the width of the list item or the image, which is already stated, and it's going to set the wrapping element equal to that. And then we're going to set overflow hidden. Now, if we come back to Firefox, you can see it's being cut off, but it's actually larger than that. Let me see if I can find it for you. If we click on that and we hover over the next one, you can see that blue hover to the right. It's exactly what we want. Now all we want to do is just move the unordered list to the left, and that'll show the next one. It's really quite easy. Okay, so now what we want to do here is that should be fine for the fade transition. Now we want to listen for if the transition was slide. So we could do if options dot transition equals slide. Fine, but we've already done slide. Let's change it to fade. And now, if it's fade, we're going to change the CSS. So this .children.css, and we should probably think about this a little bit. If we want the opacity to slowly move to 0 to display the next image, we can't float all of the images to the left, because then as soon as you change the opacity to 0, the other image is still far off to the right and it's not going to show up. So what we should do in this case is make sure that the images are absolutely positioned. That way they're all on top of one another. And that way if you fade out the first image, it then displays the second image. So that's why we're compensating here by listening for if they chose fade. And if they did, we're going to do this children CSS, and we're going to set the width equal to, once again, this.children.width. The next one is going to be the position. We need to make sure it's set to absolute. And incidentally, this is also why we need to make sure that the unordered list has a position set to relative. Otherwise, it would be positioned in relation to its nearest ancestor. And next, we're going to set the left value to 0 for all of them, and that's what's going to create that stacking feature. Okay, but we have one problem here. So what I'm going to do now is change back the default to fade, come back, refresh the page, and now look what image that changed to. So if I scroll down here and we go over the very first image, you see it's that little, like a little star. And the very last one, if we hover over it, is the little ornament. So now, because we positioned each of them absolutely and pushed them all to the left, a new z-index is created for each image. So in this case, the very last image is showing on top, but that's not what we want. We want the first image to show on top. So how can we fix this z-index problem? I can show you, if you just want to see an example. If we change the z-index to 100, it switches back. So we know it's a z-index problem, and that's what we have to fix. So I had to figure out kind of a hack. Just it's not pretty, but it's what we're going to have to do. If you guys know a better way, just let me know. So if slide, I'm sorry, that should be if fade. We're going to do for var I. Create a new variable called I, and it's going to be equal to the number of children of our unordered list or whatever our containing item is. But we're going to be using the EQ, I guess you could call it method for jQuery, and that's not 0-based, it's 1-based, so we need to do -1. And we're going to do another variable called y, and that's going to be equal to 0. I'll explain why shortly. And we're going to say if I is greater than or equal to 0, then I minus minus, we're going to go down. And we're also going to go y plus plus. So if, let's say in this case, the total number of items is 4, we're going to set I equal to 4, and we're going to set y equal to 0, and we're going to say as long as I is greater than 4, or I'm sorry, as long as 4 is greater than 0, we're going to subtract 1 after every iteration, and we're going to add 1 to y. So what we'll do here is console log, and just to make it easy, I, and that's going to be plus I, and y plus y. Whoops, let's see what we have here. And of course, not y minus 0, y equals 0. Okay, and now if we show here, you can see I is equal to 3 because it's 0 based, y is 1, and then it slowly goes down. Good. And I just closed that out. Let's open that back up. So now what we were going to do within each for statement is we're going to get the this.children, and if we want to get a specific item there, we're going to do EQ y. And if it's y is equal to 0, this is going to find the first item in the list. And we're going to set the CSS, and we're going to get Z-index. With jQuery, we need to make sure it's camel-cased. Sorry, let's get rid of that. And that's going to be equal to I, the current level for I, and we're just going to add a really large number, something like that. And I'll explain why shortly. It was kind of a weird little bug. There might be an easier way to do it. A way we could clean this up maybe is to go ahead and cache this.children. That way we don't have to find it every time. We'll come back to that shortly. And now we're going to call the fade method. So if options.transition equals fade, we're going to set some CSS, we're going to readjust the Z-index, and then we're going to call the fade method, which we'll write shortly. And now you can see it's been fixed. Let's take a look at it. Within each of these, we've set a Z-index, and now the very top one has the highest, the lowest, and there we go. That should be just fine. So it's kind of a crappy little hack, but it works. So now we have the fade method. Let's go ahead and create that. Function fade. Scroll down just a little bit. So the first thing we want to do, obviously, set an interval. And we're going to run an anonymous function. And then we need to set the speed, obviously, so rather than hard coding that in, we want the user to be able to define that or use a default option. So we're going to set that to options.pause. So the pause between each interval, and we have that up here as well. Options.pause. So within the set interval, we are going to do this.children. We're going to get the first item, .animate. And we're going to do the opacity. Remember, we're doing the fade method here, so we're going to slowly lower the opacity of each image so it shows the next one. So we're going to set the opacity to 0. And the next one, we're going to do that. How quickly are we going to do that? Well, we're going to let the user decide that as well. This is how quickly the opacity will go from 1 to 0. And that's going to be options.speed. And then finally, we're going to do a callback function, and this will run as soon as the operation is completed. And we will do this. Children, and once again, we're going to get the first one. And we're going to get the CSS, and we're going to set the opacity, and we're going to push it right back up to 1. And then we're going to also, actually, we could probably group these together. We're also going to get the Z-index. And we're going to move that to this, .children. Last, -1. And this .children last, of course, .css, Z-index -1. Okay, so what does this do? It readjusts the CSS to this.children.last.css. It's going to get whatever the last item in the set, and we're going to reduce it by 1. And that way we can make sure that it goes to the very bottom of the list. Okay. And then finally, the thing we want to do is append to this. And that's it. So let's go over this one more time. We're going to, with each interval, we're going to get the very first item within the set. We're going to animate it, and we're going to set the opacity. We're just going to fade it out. And when that's done fading, we're going to run a callback function, and we're going to get that item again. Once again, we could cache this. When we go and clean up our code, we're going to get that first item. We're going to set the opacity back up to 1 because we don't want it to be invisible. And then we're going to adjust the z-index because remember, if the top item has the highest z-index and we just push it to the very bottom, it's still going to show on the very top because its z-index is higher than the other ones. So we want to make sure that we change the z-index and make sure it's lower than all of the others. So we're just going to get the current z-index of the very last item and set it to 1 less than that. And we're going to append it, and that's going to take it from the very top of the list and move it to the bottom, and that allows for the cycle. Oh, that happens when you don't look at your computer. Okay, and that should be fine for the fade, I believe. So now let's do one more. We also need to listen for, let me find the, clean up this a little bit. Okay, we have our fade, and let's do another one for our slide. So we're going to do a lot of this pretty similar. Why don't we just copy this and then clean up from there. So set interval this.animate, and we're, instead of changing the opacity, we're going to change the left value, and we want that to shift to the left however wide the current div is. So that's going to be a negative plus this.parent.width. Okay? So this is setting, remember we set the wrapping, it's getting a little complicated, we set the wrapper div equal to whatever the children are. So we're just setting here, we're going to move the left by however wide that is. Okay. And we're going to do that once again, option speed, and then we're going to run a callback function. And this time we're going to get the CSS, and we'll do .css, and we're going to get that left, and once again we're going to bring it right back to 0 because we don't want it to stay to the left. And we're going to get the children first, and we don't need to worry about z-index here, and we're going to append it to this. Okay, so now let's see. The only other thing we need to do is, after our transition fade, we also need to listen for if the user chose slide instead. We could do an else, but if we're going to be adding more to it, why don't we keep it with slide. So if options dot transition equals slide, then we'll just do the slide method. Okay, pretty sure there's probably going to be a mistake here or there, and there is. So let's see what the two errors are. Missing a closing parentheses after the animate within the slide function. Let's see. This.animate, we're going to go to the left, negative, plus this parent.width. There it was. It was just an extra semicolon. And now let's see if it's working. Nope. We already have an error. So append to this. It's not a function. So let's figure out, and I see it right now, append. Too busy talking. Append to. fades, and we're still getting, maybe I need to refresh, or did I do it twice? Of course I did, because I copied and pasted. Okay, so it fades, and this is the third image, and the fourth image, and there we go. So it is repeating. 3, 4. Good. So now the next step is let's set the default transition to slide and let's see if that's working. Refresh. Good, it is working. So that's the second image, the third image, the fourth image. And it's repeating. Perfecto. Okay, so now what we want to do is make sure that there are a couple things that we can fix. Definitely, we can go through this code and catch some of the variables a little more so it's a little less intensive. What we might do is in the comments see if you guys can figure out some ways to clean up the code. I think that would be fun. But there's one little thing we have to worry about. Let's go into our index, and let's say the user wants to set some custom parameters. And let's say they decide, let's set the pause equal to maybe something really short, like 400 milliseconds. And let's set the speed to something like 2000. And we'll set the transition to slide. Let's see how that works. Refresh the page. And look at that. So once the slide completes, we get this weird flicker. Watch. It goes there, and then it jumps back. And I was looking through this, and I found that if you set the pause less than what the current speed is, it's not going to work. It causes a little flicker. So what we need to do now is add an if statement that listens for if that pause value is less than the speed, we need to adjust it and make it larger than the speed. It's kind of strange. So let's change it to 2100 and see if that fixes it. Yeah, see? And now it's working. So what we're going to do here is let's go to JW Slider, and within, where can we put this? Right here, maybe. And we're saying if options.pause is less than or equal to options.slide, then options.pause equals options, not options.slide, options.speed. And then we're going to add something like 100 just to make sure that it is larger. So now if we console.log options.pause and we set it to something like 200 milliseconds and refresh the page, now it's been changed to 2100. And this will just make sure that there isn't any kind of weird issue. Let's change the defaults now from maybe 1000 to 2000 and get rid of all that. Refresh the page. Make sure it's working. Good. So let's try to modify it. Once again, we're going to set a speed. Let's see what happens when we set the speed to 5000. Play around with it. Remember, the speed references how quick the transition occurs. So look, very slowly. And let's add a pause of another, something like that. Really long pause. There you go. And you can see a very long and extended pause. And there you have it. So you would probably not want to do something that low. And then finally, let's do the final thing and make sure that the transition is working. So now we're going to change transition is fade. And this should fade out now. And because we didn't pass in pause and speed, it'll just use the defaults. Okay, that's mostly what I wanted to teach you today. A very simple and easy to use slider. Once you compress it, it'll probably be, I don't know, 2 or 3K. I'd like to see how you guys, there are ways here that we can speed things up a little bit. Just little things like where maybe every time a function is called, we can cache some things, we can clean it up just a little bit, and I'd like to see what you guys can do. So leave a comment and maybe link to Pastebin or something like that to let's see how much better we can make it. So thank you so much for watching. My name is Jeffrey Way. For the best web development tutorials and screencasts available, continue visiting net.touchplus.com, part of the Envato network. Bye.